I suggest to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 10th WMUG Tuesdays webinar. So we already had a lot of them. We are organizing these webinars because of the COVID-19 crisis, and we have no option to actually we have no option yet, I must say it correctly, to actually host physical meetings. We are investigating possibilities again to do it in a way that we can actually also make sure that we can keep distance, etc. And once that's more concrete, we will of course share that with you. But again, the first meeting after the holidays. For today, we have Ronny. Ronny will introduce himself after I'm finished talking, and let me make some progress so that Ronny has more time available to do his session. We can organize this meeting thanks to our sponsors. So a big thanks to our sponsors. Without their help, we are not able to provide these kinds of webinars. You can follow us on social media. I always like this slide because we even have a Jammer group, but we never use it, so don't visit us there. But you can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter. If you are going to tweet something, please use the hashtag WMUG_NL. That's our official hashtag, which we use. We have a meetup page and a YouTube channel for which we are actually seeking subscribers, so that we can actually replace this ugly URL with a more common URL. But in order to be able to do so, we need some more subscribers. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel and make us happy. Let me see. The other thing I have to share is that for the next, that's not next Tuesday, but Tuesday after, we have a next WMUG webinar planned with two of our Belgium community friends, Tim and Jasper, and they are going to talk about Microsoft Defender ATP and Chocolatey. I think that will be a very interesting session to join as well. And you can join by clicking on the link, which of course is not a link at the moment, but if you go to www.wmug.nl, you actually end up on our meetup page and you can RSVP for that meeting. Last but not least, if you want to present on our WMUG webinars, you have the option to actually submit a session via Sessionize. So you can actually use this URL and actually submit a session. We will review that session then, and you never know, we might ask you to actually provide that session as well. We want to serve as a platform. Even if you are not really experienced, please let us know if you want to present on something, and we will look into the possibilities of providing you with a session on one of our webinars. And then last but not least, I want to hand over the presentation to Ronny. Ronny, thanks for joining us. We are again really excited to have you here. And I personally think that you have a very interesting topic, a product which has much possibilities as well. So I'm very curious to hear what you have to say today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Kenneth, and thank you for having me. And of course, all the people from the office or from home or from everywhere, have a warm welcome to this session. I'm glad to talk about this session, and particularly in this subject about endpoint analytics and how you can use endpoint analytics to improve your end user experience with data-driven insights. So small introduction. Ronny de Jong. I'm working for InSpark as principal consultant, and in my day-to-day job, I'm mainly focusing on the modern workplace in its broad way. So all aspects like identity, the management part as well as the security part, comes into play. And yeah, it's a great area to being active on and to share the knowledge. And also part of that modern workplace, you see popping up new capabilities. To give you some great insights and manage your modern workplace in a smoother way. And let's move on to the agenda. So what we are covering today is what actually is endpoint analytics and how you can use it, how you can enable it, and what data is gathered, what is the architecture behind endpoint analytics, and of course, important thing, how you can start with endpoint analytics yourself. So we will also cover the requirements you have to address in order to successfully enable endpoint analytics. And you will see that endpoint analytics is actually, and solution part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which is actually easy to enable and give you great insights. And that's why I'm very excited about it, because it's sense and simplicity. That's the strength of the solution. And hopefully at the end of this presentation, you will agree with. And if you're not already enabled it and tested yourself, I can encourage you to do so. From a logic perspective, if you have questions or other things, I would say raise your hand, or otherwise drop it in the chat, so Kenneth or Erik can moderate them. And during the session, we will also make some time to answer your questions, and let it just an interactive session. So let's take it from there. Why endpoint analytics? Well, our end users are facilitated in devices, and devices, normally we're talking about endpoints, and that can be a laptop, it can be a desktop. We're providing them the software to being productive. And we want to make sure that the endpoints we are facilitating are in a good shape. And it's not always the case, and sometimes it's due to budget constraints, that you have some hardware models which are very old, but you have to still keep up with it. Or it can be also a configuration thing, that you have recent hardware, but it is not performing as you might expect. So it's always a challenge to get those insights. And when your end users are reporting an incident, and they are complaining about the device is slow or the network is slow, but it's hard to pinpoint what exactly is the root cause. And sometimes it's very obvious because it's an hardware related thing and something is broken, then you have to replace your device. But sometimes your device is just performing, but then again, your end users are still complaining. And is it a configuration thing? Is it an IT related thing? Is it an end user thing? Or my misconfigured software or something else? And that's one of the caveats we have to deal with IT these days, and not only from the traditional, also from a modern way. So that's actually the lack of visibility for our end user experience. So how we can cope with that, and how we can have those insights, and not only insights from a feeling or a Fingerspitzengefühl. You want to make it concrete. And you want to benchmark that with numbers, and that's really helping you if you have those insights. And those insights, we can translate them in scores, so you can benchmark your configuration, and based on that you can identify and say, yes, indeed, we have a problem with a certain hardware model or an hardware series, or it can be more a software related thing. Another thing is particular in larger enterprises, changes are always happening, and sometimes changes do have a positive impact on the endpoints, or sometimes changes are related because of security or other regulations. and might have an adverse effect of your endpoints. The same for software updates, security policies, and yeah, if something is changing, it's again, is it a feeling, or can you really monitor it and show the evidence by showing them the figures and say, hey, since a certain update or since a Windows feature update, we do see a lag in performance, or the opposite way, we had a pilot and we are now able to convince your management, say, if you're applying this feature update, your performance of your endpoints will increase. And at the end, that will definitely have a positive impact on your end user experience. So that said, Endpoint Analytics, put it in a perspective, Endpoint Analytics is part of the Microsoft Endpoint Manager family, as part of the Microsoft 365 suite. But it's actually also belonging in another suite, which is named Productivity Score. So putting in that perspective, Productivity Score is an overall benchmark of your tenant, of your Microsoft 365 environment. And it's benchmarking in two areas. It's benchmarking your employee experience, and it's benchmarking your technology experience. So when it comes to employee experience, then it's related the way how your users, how your organization is communicating. How they are emailing a lot, are they using Teams? And the same with content collaboration. When they are using email, are they sending their Word or other files as an attachment? Or they're using OneDrive or Teams to share those documents in a safe and easy way. And the same applies with mobility. If you have Microsoft 365 and your end users are still using the native Outlook of the native email client and are not using the Teams client or other productivity tools, yeah, that's a potential what you're missing. And that's giving you insights. And based on those insights, you have to interpret them. And you can then define your concrete actions and campaigns to improve your employee experience. Well, the same applies with your technology experience. And today we will deep dive and drill down into endpoint analytics. And technology experience is about the endpoint analytics as well as the network connectivity of your endpoints. So we have the tool. Yeah, we have Microsoft 365 as a productivity suite to facilitate our end users being productive. But our hardware should be properly configured, and that's something what endpoint analytics come into play and give you those insights. And those insights can be defined in certain areas. So when we are zooming into the endpoint analytics, then we are talking about the startup performance of your endpoints. So booting your device and signing in, applying your group policies, sometimes it takes a while. So with startup performance, you have the insights of your boot score and your core sign-in scores. And based on that, you can also have a trend analysis and see, okay, a certain model series, they are doing a bad job, or they have a hard disk in it instead of an SSD. And that might be an improvement area. So there are many other things from a hardware perspective, and it also helps you from a hardware lifecycle management to decide, okay, this model, well, we have to deprecate it, we have to replace it, or another approach, and we surprised with the customer, their end users in a happy way, we sorting by top 10 bad performers and pick those devices and reached out to the end users and said, hey, is it correct that your device isn't performing well? Well, it was an understatement, and they confirmed it, and we handed out a new laptop and say, okay, this should improve your productivity, and they were happy. So that's a concrete action to improve your end user experience. Well, if you're continuing with proactive remediation, we can detect some misconfigurations, and those misconfigurations can be addressed or proactively addressed before the end users are complaining about those potential issues. So by using some scripts, custom scripts or scripts provided by the community, for example, and I will show you later on a presentation, that you can determine if certain services are running or not. And if they are not running, for example, Office 365 click to run, then you can detect it. And based on the detection, you can also do remediation. So that's an automatic remediation of a potential issue for your end users. And that might or will definitely reduce the number of calls or incidents for your help desk. So that's the second one. The third one, that's actually how your environment is configured. And with the environment, I'm meaning, are you taking advantage of cloud services like Azure AD, your identities, talking about provisioning, autopilot, are you taking benefit of it? And are your endpoints, for example, on the latest OS version, Windows 10, in order to take benefit of all the capabilities? So that's recommended software. And the last one, that's the score itself, and that's the dashboard, which all information comes together and gives you the steering information to move on and to take some actions. So that's it. That was a brief introduction of Endpoint Analytics. So I'd like to show you in the first demo how you are enable Endpoint Analytics and how you can onboard your endpoints to Endpoint Analytics. And as you can see, it's a mutual approach. There is a deployment scenario for cloud native clients managed by Intune. And you can also configure your configuration manager infrastructure to send that data, your endpoint data, to Endpoint Analytics. And let me show you. So what you're seeing here, I will good readable. So we are now going to the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. And this tenant has been flighted, and Endpoint Analytics is still in preview, so it's not GA yet. So it might be that you are flighted and then you might appear Endpoint Analytics in your tenant. If not, then your tenant is not flighted. So what you see here is the Endpoint Analytics overview, and what you see is a high overscore of this tenant. So in this case, we are using my employee's tenant, and you'll see here an Endpoint Analytics of 91. Well, the baseline, your start point, is a score of 50. And over time, you can create some snapshots baselines, and based on that, you can keep track of your progress. Are you improving or are you not? Sorting are your actions sorting progress or not? So based on that, you can keep track on the progress. So we, for example, had a startup performance of 83 and recommended software score of 99. That was in March. So you see, we did some progress on recommended software, but from the startup performance, we're still keeping on that number. And that can be certain reasons why that is. So I will go through later in more details about it, but going back to the settings, what you see here is the Intune connector and the configuration manager connector. By default, if you enable the Endpoint Analytics from Intune and you open it for the first time, you will go to a wizard, and that wizard guides you to set up and enable the Endpoint Analytics in your tenant. And actually, it's just a consent that you agree that the data from the endpoints will be sent over to Microsoft, anonymize it, and use it for the insights. So that's actually what it takes. And by default, it's creating an Intune collection policy, data collection policy. It will target it by default to all your devices. And let's go into that policy. I have renamed it based on the naming convention we are using. And what you're actually seeing, the policy is actually enabling the health monitoring on your endpoints. And as you can see in the description, and later on I will also show you in the prerequisites, it's only supporting from Windows 10, starting from version 1903 and higher. And there are also some certain SKUs which are in scope. So Home, for example, is not supported. And you have also a distinction between the proactive remediation, which also requires an enterprise SKU or an education SKU. So when we are enabling, we have also by default the options to set the scope. And actually a scope means that you are defining which kind of events you are sending up to Microsoft. So are you sending the boot performance, or are you sending the basic and boot performance? By default, it's boot performance only. And that defines the way what kind of data is being sent to Microsoft. And how is the definition, how does the definition look like of those kind of telemetry files? What you see here is the data location on my endpoint, and you see a lot of JSON files, and one of those JSON files, that is the device health configuration telemetry policy. And here you see the definition of that JSON file, which actually defining what kind of data is sent over to Microsoft. So what you see here, it's using the Intune management extension provider, and you will see here the rate, the sample rate, as well as what kind of events are shared. So you see the app crash, app hanging, the boot event, and the log performs. At the end of the presentation, I will also give you some insights about the roadmap of Endpoint Analytics. And the funny thing is, right now, today, we are only collecting or providing reporting from a boot event perspective and a logon performance event perspective. But you already see here under the hood and in the telemetry data, we are already able to collect also the app crash information and the app hanging information. And that will be later on also extended with additional features or information which will be collected and also pulled over into Endpoint Analytics. So that's from a cloud native perspective. So the final thing is, and I want to show you that also from a configuration manager perspective in a hybrid scenario. This is our test tenant and lab environment. I want to show you, getting back to the settings, that you'll see here in this environment, we have the configuration manager data connector online as well. So in this case is configuration manager already configured. And that's actually also a straightforward process. And one of the requirements to enable Endpoint Analytics is that your configuration manager infrastructure hierarchy should be on 2002 or higher. And if you're on 2002 or higher, then you have the capability to take benefit of cloud attach, because that's one of the requirements in order to upload your Endpoint Analytics data. So as you can see here, it's part of cloud attach. And by enabling cloud attach here, then you have also the option to enable Endpoint Analytics. So that's from an infrastructure perspective. And in the past, you had also to configure your client settings. Prior to 2002, it wasn't enabled by default, but from 2002 and higher, or after you're upgrading your hierarchy to 2002 2, it's by default enabled. So you can see here that the setting in your client settings enables endpoint analytics data. So it's actually twofold. It's in your configuration, in your infrastructure, enabling endpoint analytics, as well as from your endpoint view to enable endpoint analytics and send over the data. And you can also, of course, it's Configuration Manager. Configuration Manager has an extensive way of logging. On your endpoint, you will see the way of how the clients are sending over the data to your Configuration Manager hierarchy. And from your Configuration Manager hierarchy, you will see also it's sending to the Microsoft services. And based on that, I will show you how that infrastructure as well as the data flow and architecture is look like. I will show you that later on in the presentation. But these are the ways how you enable endpoint analytics from Intune perspective as well as from the Configuration Manager perspective. So that said, the data flow and how is the architecture of endpoint analytics look like. Well, I showed you and I explained to you that we can gather the data from Intune, and during the enrollment and the onboarding of endpoint analytics, the device health manager policy is created and is deployed to your endpoints. And while the endpoints receiving that configuration profile, they are enabling the endpoint analytics data and sending it over to the device services from Intune. So that is the first approach, and then you will see that the endpoints are popping up and reporting to endpoint analytics. When it comes to endpoint manager, configuration manager, it's almost the same, only the approach is a bit different. As I showed you, we are just enabling endpoint analytics from an infrastructure perspective, making sure that the client settings are enabled, and it's using the configuration manager gateway services to pull over the data to Intune. So it's a bit different approach. You're not required to use co-management if you're using SCCM. Yeah, you can use it alongside, but it's not a mandatory requirement. Your configuration manager is just a broker to send over that data to endpoint analytics. And you will see here a different viewpoint. So you see your clients Intune managed, and they are receiving the policy and sending over the data to endpoint manager hierarchy. And when it comes to your SCCM clients, the clients sending the data to your site server, and then again the SCCM site server is sending over the data to the configuration manager gateway services, and then pulling together in your portal. So that's the architecture and the data flow of how endpoint analytics is working. The next demo, we are going into the startup performance. And there you go. And what we are able to collect the data from our endpoints, and what you see here is we have 3 areas of reports. Well, starting with the startup performance. Today, this is one of the most concrete information of your endpoints. So you will see here the startup score, and the startup score, that's actually a breakdown between the boot time and the sign-in time. So the boot time entails how long it takes when your device is powered on. So from power on to your login screen, that's the boot score. The sign-in score is actually from the point you're logging in to the point that your have a responsive desktop is loaded. That's the core sign-in score. And when we are scrolling down, you will see also when you have your group policies in place, particular if you're in a hybrid scenario with an Active Directory, you might have the group policies, startup policies, and your login policies. Well, in this case, we have a cloud-only scenario. So this is an environment without Active Directory, without group policies. So you don't see any delays from there. But you see definitely the metrics of how long it will take when your login screen appears, or how long it takes when your desktop is loaded, or even a breakdown when you have a responsive desktop. And based on that, we also might report recommendations. And recommendations in terms of, okay, you have to replace your hard disks, or you have to replace certain models, or hey, have a look at a certain process because the process is not well configured and have negative impact on your startup performance or behavior. So that's the overall startup score. And if we are going into the model performance, that's actually a roll-up of the models you have in your environment. So once your endpoint sending the data and Endpoint Analytics is collecting the data, the devices appear here in the device performance section. And that's actually based on the policy you deployed as part of the enrollment. However, these are individual devices. And if you have certain models and starting from a minimum of 10 devices, they will appear here as a series. So the model performance gives you some useful insights when a certain generation of a type of laptop is well performing or not well performing. And that might be an indicator to say, okay, if we have a Surface Book with a generation 1, they are not performing, we will have to replace them. And those insights gives you also a proactive approach to address these. And explained in my introduction, when we are sorting on the boot time, you will see here there are a few laptops or desktops with lengthy boot time. So the boot time here is taking much longer than overall with the other ones. Or when we're looking into the sign-in time, we do see here there are a few ones with extremely long sign-in time. And based on these metrics, you might decide and say, okay, we are taking a top 10 or top 50, depending on the how large your environment is, and say, okay, let's reach out to those users and replace those devices. And if we are drilling down, then you will see here some more details of this endpoint. You'll see it has a score from performance score of 50 and you will see here, okay, your device is taking more time than it's in general with the others compared to the other ones. You see also a breakdown, and in this case, you will see here it's just logging in. No group policy phase and no feature updates are involved with that. The sign-in history, you'll see also a breakdown. You'll see this color responsive to the desktop phase. Desktop itself or first sign in, and the first sign in, that means a first sign in after a feature update. And what you also see is a breakdown of the startup processes which are negative impacting your system performance. So in this case, you'll see SVC host is involved, and it's with 20 seconds, it's definitely a big impact. From the other hand, to me, it's not very clear what exactly this SVC host process entails. So I'm not sure what I have to do with this process. Sometimes I do see Chrome or Google or whatever process, and based on that, you can decide, okay, we have to remove those faulty software. And let's pick another one. I can also have a different insight. Different approach. So that was from the Endpoint Analytics, but I can also drill down from the device perspective. So as an example, I will show my own device. And then you'll see here the user experience. And this is also very helpful for your help desk. So when I'm reaching out to the help desk and complaining my desktop is performing poorly, then the help desk says, well, Ronny, it's a 100% score. Your laptop should performing well. And based on the figures, the boot history, we don't have any reason to say, okay, we have to replace your device. And yeah, sometimes it will take some more time, but that was because you're in an insider previewing, and then you get often your feature updates. And yeah, and after a feature update, then the first time will take some more time to sign in. So that's obvious. So we have a cause for this, and based on that, no action been taken. Otherwise, then say, okay, remove you from the insider previewing. That can be an reason to do that. But sometimes you definitely have a root cause and say, yeah, this is a hard disk which is not an SSD, and therefore we will replace your laptop, or we replace your hard disk with an SSD, for example. So that actually, when it comes to the startup performance, and I believe we have covered everything from the startup performance. So that's getting back to the presentation. Perhaps meanwhile have a short break for some questions, if there are. I'm not sure if there are questions, but
Ronny, we didn't get any questions in the chat, but if somebody wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. You can unmute yourself and then ask your question to Ronny.
Okay, perfect. So we have explained a bit more about the startup performance, and yeah, we also explained how the architecture is working, how the architecture is look like. But we have also some configuration at the endpoint side, and in case if they have trouble or your data is not pulled over to the services, then you might have some directions to research it and say, okay, I don't see my endpoint is popping up into Endpoint Analytics. What can be the reason of it? And these areas might be helpful to help you to investigate whether or not it's something at the services side. Is it your endpoint side? So one of the things is the policy deployed from Intune. It's a configuration policy, and it's received on your client. It should be receiving on your client. And one of the things is you can keep track on it by the registry key, for example. So what you see here the device health monitoring configuration as a result of the policy which is deployed from Intune perspective. So you'll see here the scope, and in my introduction I showed you the policy and also the scope of the policy. We have the basic information as well as the boot information, and you see here also that we only selected the boot information, which is also equally to the configuration on the endpoint. It's pointing to production, and our tenant is located in Europe, for example. Another approach to show you the configuration, that's by the MDM diagnostics, to make sure that the endpoints is receiving the policies. And of course, you can see it from the services, from Intune itself. So this is the MDM diagnostics report, and that will help you this way. Help you what policies are configured or what policies are available and what are being set. So in this case, you will see the device health monitoring. It's the scope. And again, you'll see the boot performance is set as the scope. And the default value is empty. And the same here for the service instance. So it's pointing to production. And the instance is located in Europe, for example. So those are as a result of the endpoint configuration policy we deployed previously as part of the enrollment and onboarding. So getting back to the configuration profiles, device health, was it? Here, Windows Health Monitoring. But you can also create it yourself. As mentioned, it's initially targeted in scope to all devices, but you might want to start it with a pilot group, for example. Create profile, platform, Windows 10. Windows Health Monitoring. And then you create it on your own. And then again, you can disable it, enable it, and you can select which scope, just the boot performance or an overall performance. And I can imagine that the scope will be extended over time, including also the reboot information or application information, as you might notice from a telemetry level perspective. So I already showed you the telemetry configuration, and yeah, as part of the endpoint configuration policy deployed by Intune, it's actually it's using the policy CSP, the device health monitoring, which actually enables endpoint analytics and yeah, gathering the data from it. It's also documented via the docs, so you can also yeah, look it over there. But that's the built-in configuration setting provided from Microsoft. The third one, the third function of endpoint analytics is proactive remediation. And proactive remediation, it's another great feature of endpoint analytics, which allows you to proactively take actions on potential issues or issues which are already being raised or encountered by your end users. And what you see here, for example, it's by default built in yeah, Office click to run services detection. So this is a script which detects whether your Office click to run services is running as expected. And why is that important? Because that service is responsible that your Office click to run is being updated. So the services make sure that your click to run installation will get the updates, or the policy services via the Office service provider. And if it's not running, you might at some point in time, you might end up in a situation where your Office is not working as expected. So its script is able to detect it, and once it's detected, it can also automatically remediate that, and by enabling the services. And as you can see here, it's straightforward, and it's click to run is working as expected in our environment. But that might be a different in yours or with other environments. So what you can do here is uploading your own scripts. So in this case, I will update, for example, that's Microsoft Defender application control. And application control is necessarily for your integrity, your hardware virtualization integrity. And we want to make sure that it's running on our endpoints. So this script, which is made by a colleague of mine, detects whether or not credential guard and device guard is enabled on our endpoints. And if it's not enabled, then it's also checking whether or not the hardware of your endpoint is capable to be enabled. So if it's not enabled and it's capable, it's ready for enabling device guard and credential guard, then it will result with a return code 1. And based on that, it's indicating, okay, it's not enabled, hardware is capable, so it should be enabled. And in that case, we are applying another sample of the script, which is remediating. And remediating in this context means that device guard and credential guard will be enabled. So based on that, you can select a group or users or particular test group. Based on that, you can deploy this remediation. And yeah, you can imagine this has a huge potential, because almost everything you can imagine which can be scripted with PowerShell can be developed or created, and based on this you can deploy it, and you can also determine on what frequency the script is run. So if you go, you see also the device status deployed. You can also configure the how many what the interval is. Is it every 1 day? Is it every 1 hour, etc. And based on that, you can take automatically remediation of certain processes or other things which are custom for your environment, and preventing, and again, a lot of calls for your help desk. So that's another great feature of Endpoint Analytics, proactive remediation.
Ronny?
Yes.
So that's actually because we already have a mechanism within Intune to actually execute scripts. And so the only difference between this functionality is that it's able to have a detection script first and then provide a remediation. But do you see any other differences?
Yeah, there's a difference in a way by default. If you're deploying scripts via Intune, it's mostly a fire and forget. You will have a return code whether or not the script is executed successfully. But you can report it over it if it's successful. But that's not a mechanism, or you should provide it in its script itself to build that functionality or intelligence in its script, but it doesn't give you the reporting as it does give with proactive remediation. So it's a bit different. And with proactive remediation, you have the detect script, and the detect script is actually detecting whether or not it's compliant. Let's put it in that way. And if it's not compliant, then you want to take action on it. And that's actually the difference. If you deploy it with Intune itself, it's just deploying it. And once it's failing, it's nothing, no follow-up action is done based on that. So
so actually this is a way better solution then.
Yeah, you can also see it as part of your ETL process, and if you have a problem, and based on the problem, you can build your own remediation and say, okay, we do see a certain pattern in our environment, and we mitigating it with the detection script, and if it's detecting, then we also taking care of it. It's a approach, and there are many ways how you can achieve your goal. You can also achieve it by desired state configuration, for example, but that's a different mechanism, might be more complex because it doesn't have a management interface. And putting it in the Endpoint Manager area is just an extension of Intune, of MEM, and giving you this opportunity to say, I can report on it and I can take action on it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Then the final one is recommended software. And with recommended software, we actually benchmarking your environment. You're assessing your environment, and actually it's done by 4 pillars. As mentioned, of course, you should be on Windows 10. Endpoint Analytics only applies from Windows 10 starting 1903 or higher. And yeah, that's one of, it cannot be used with Windows 7 or Windows 8. It's not backwards compatible. It's just making sure with Windows 10 we are fully able to manage it in a modern sense. And that's why it's one of the requirements says, okay, you should be on Windows 10. And the same applies for cloud identity. And this is actually making sure that when you're using Windows 10, your users have a synced account at least. So if you're in a hybrid scenario, your account should be synced to Azure AD. And it's also, it's because of you can take benefit of all the advantages Azure AD has to offer with you in conjunction with a hybrid Azure AD joint or Azure AD joint workplace. So that's another benchmark why cloud identity is putting in here. The third one is managing your endpoint. So once our endpoint is managed through the cloud and has a cloud identity, it's the ideal way to manage it. So if your endpoints are managed by Intune, it's also check in the box, whether it's hybrid through co-management or it's native cloud. And the fourth and last one, that's actually the autopilot. And you might have a different start point, and in the ideal situation, your provisioning is executed and done with Windows Autopilot or Windows Autopilot White Glove. So if you're purchasing new devices or replacing your existing devices, you want to provide your end users the self-service capability of Windows Autopilot. So in case your device is not functioning as expected and it's software related, you might perform a Windows Autopilot reset. Or given the situation of COVID-19 and your end users are working from home and the device got broken or stolen, or you're a new employee, then your employee are shipping a new device to your home, to your doormat, and then the end user is able to provisioning the endpoint itself. So that's another benchmark, check in the box why Windows Autopilot is part of the score. And these categories might be extended over time. And so this is the recommended software. Actually, what we are saying here, if you're using Windows 10, if you have a cloud identity, and if your endpoints are managed through the cloud and you're using Autopilot, then you're on the ideal situation of managing and facilitating an workplace to your end users. And again, with the baseline capability, we can keep track on the progress over time. So it's starting by 51 or 50, and in March we were on 95, and we are now made a snapshot for the demo purpose, and you see, okay, we're almost a perfect score of 99%. So this might be a housekeeping that some old devices are still or non-existing devices are in Autopilot, but this is the ideal situation. And if you're native cloud environment, then it's easy to achieve this. But if you're coming from Windows 7 or you're in the migration, in the progress of migrating to a modern workplace or hybrid, that might be, yeah, a bit challenging, particularly if you're in a large enterprise. And yeah, then these numbers are far from ideal. It's challenging to achieve, but at least it gives you some guidance and some pointers, and also make some KPIs with your IT department or to your manager and say, okay, for this year the goal is to being standardized on Windows 10, alongside with the cloud identity and most ideally with cloud management. And over time we will apply autopilot, for example. So that's the way how you can address that and moving forward to a modern workplace.
Hey Ronny, we have a question for you. The question is, what version of Windows 10 would be the target for the first pillar? Would that be the latest or N-1?
No, it's starting with 1903, I believe. It's a good question. I don't believe it's if we are taking into account our environment, the latest official build is 2004, and we do have also endpoints which are not on the latest version of Windows 10. So I'm sure they are 1909 or even at 1903. So at least from an OS version or build perspective, we don't have a perfect score. But again, you will see we are all measured that all our endpoints are Windows 10. And also from a documentation perspective, Endpoint Analytics is supported from 1903 or higher. So if you have Windows 10, but you are on 1809 or 1803 or an older version, then it might be not eligible for this score. So indeed, so the question is correct. If you're on 1809, then you might be scored as a non-compliant or non-Windows 10, although it's Windows 10.
Yeah. Hey, another question popped up, but it's by Erik. So maybe Erik can ask the question himself.
Yes, Ronny. First, in which license? I thought something I saw A5, but is that really the license you need for this? And much more important thing I want to know, what's your opinion about these new features? Microsoft is investing on this, but the remediation, all that kind of stuff is already there for years in the MSP products like ASEA, like Datto RMM, all that kind of tools. So what's your opinion about that and about the licensing?
Yeah, the licensing, I can go forward. This is addressing your question about licensing. It's definitely not an E5 feature. It's an E3 feature, starting from EMS or Intune, or you do have the Microsoft 365 queue. That's part of Endpoint Analytics. And if you have proactive remediation, so you want to use scripts or other things to solve proactively issues or preventing those, then at least you have Windows 10 Enterprise queue starting from an E3 or higher. So Endpoint Analytics itself, so the recommended software, performance score, the startup score, that's all E3. And if you want to perform proactive remediation, then you should also have licenses for Windows 10. And getting back to your other question about there are already other solutions on the market yet, which are more mature. Microsoft is also open and frankly and honest to it and says, yeah, we are just entering the market and this is just the start. It's not a version 1.0. It's not mature yet, but it's a good 0.9 version. So there are definitely better products in the market as of today. But yeah, Microsoft is Microsoft, and they are investing heavily to extend this product and also including new features and new capabilities. I will show you and I'll give you a sneak peek of what the roadmap looks like. But it's also extending the value of your current licenses. So you already, assuming you might have already licenses. So for those which are having licenses, it's extending the value of your licenses with new capabilities. And for those which are already using other products, they might, decide over time to say, okay, we are start using endpoint analytics. It's just in play of, okay, do you have multiple point solutions? And how you say that, you're optimizing your management suite. And Microsoft 365 is a management suite solution, best of all the products. And it's not mature yet, and it's not the best one, but it's definitely a good start to start using it and get figures about how you are performing from a technical perspective, and also impacting your endpoint or your end user happiness. So hopefully is that addressing your question about the other options in the market and the licensing. Getting back to how you get started with endpoint analytics. It's Intune managed, co-managed. It's Windows 10 SKU or Pro, Education or Enterprise. As mentioned, Home isn't supported. Well, startup performance, it's starting with 1903. So the other versions are benchmarked and might be calculated. I'm not sure that this one is just giving me a doubt and say, okay, perhaps might be in 1809 also being rolling in the score of Windows 10. So that's something I will, as a takeaway, to reach out to the product team, ask them what the details are. And your endpoint should be Azure AD joint or hybrid Azure AD joint. That's from an endpoint manager perspective. For configuration manager, there are a few more obvious config manager, well, 2002 or higher. One of the other requirements is that you have to enable tenant attach, which is part of the endpoint analytics. Without tenant attach, you are not able to enable endpoint analytics. So that's a dependency, and you need some connectivity to make sure that your endpoints are able to send the data to SCCM, and the data from SCCM itself should be able to deploy to the Microsoft gateway services. That's the licenses. I already covered that one. So just to recap, it's Intune E3 or Intune EMS or Microsoft 365 E3, and for remediation you also need the Windows 10 license, and of course within a Microsoft 365 it's covered. We discussed and covered the features of Endpoint Analytics as of today. It's still in preview, and the team is also working on new capabilities. One of the most asked things are the reliability, and that's also one of the things about feature updating. In the past we have also challenges with feature updates. They are now using mechanisms like safeguard, making sure that if the device is not compatible, they are better safe than sorry and say, okay, we are not allow you to install the latest feature update. So they are definitely focusing on the reliability of your OS. Blue screen of death. What is the root cause of it? Is it a boot which is expected? Is it caused by a driver, or is it by bad software? All those insights are collected, and those are popping up also in these report style as you noticed from the current features. The same for app health, and I already showed you here that the telemetry is already there. So we do have the provider already, but it's not not in the interface yet, but you will see they are already preparing the infrastructure, so they are able to give you those insights from an app health perspective. So it's going much further than only your operating system. It's also taking into account your app health. And as mentioned, the integration with the productivity score. So the Endpoint Analytics will roll up in your productivity score, where the employee experience and the technology experience is combined, and based on that you can also make some agreements with your service provider or with your IT, setting goals. Okay, for this quarter we will improve our user experience with a certain percent number. That's why it's useful. And we're talking about other features, additional remediation scripts. There will be a Git hub library for community contributions, advanced analytics, ServiceNow integration, and it's still a high potential feature, I believe. And I mentioned it's definitely not ready yet, but the potential is huge.
Ronny, sorry to interrupt you. We have another question from Pascal on whether the solution is going to deprecate desktop analytics.
It's an interesting question. First of all, I'm getting lost of all those analytics solutions: Windows Analytics, Desktop Analytics, Workplace Analytics, Endpoint Analytics, you name it. Well, it's definitely not a successor of Desktop Analytics. So it's complete different solutions. Desktop Analytics is just for the purpose of making sure that you're ready for upgrading to another Windows 10 version. So it's more from an app compat perspective. That's what Desktop Analytics entails. Endpoint Analytics is just the way how your endpoints are operating. Are they running smooth? Can you optimize them? That's not something what Desktop Analytics does today. Desktop Analytics is just giving you the insights. Are you ready? Are your software ready for the next Windows feature update? And of course, I'm not Mr. Microsoft myself, so I don't know what the future might look like, and perhaps over time those analytics solutions might converge. That might be a good candidate, but today they are completely separate.
Okay, thanks.
Then the key takeaways from this session. It's giving you an overview what Endpoint Analytics does, what it can give you, what the added value is, you can use it, how it's working, how you can onboard Endpoint Analytics either via Configuration Manager or by Intune. And hopefully with this session you have a better understanding if it's a fit for your organization. And as mentioned in one of the comments, there are already other solutions and other software which does the same, which give you end user experience analytics or insights. It's also what I mentioned. Microsoft is extending its services. It's extending the value of their solutions, and this is another example of within MEM. And there, for example, policy analytics, that's another one, enabling you making the shift from migrating group policies to modern policies. They're just providing you tools for the market to ease the modernization of endpoints, and give you also tools to manage those endpoints in a proper way. And putting in that perspective, that's Endpoint Analytics is just another solution for that. So I will share the slides afterwards, so I'm sure Kenneth or Erik will share them and make them available for you. Some good resources to find out yourself and read on your own. Microsoft, for example, if you want to enroll your Endpoint Analytics, there's a link. You see it, aka.ms Endpoint Analytics. Just make sure that you are logged in as an Intune admin, otherwise it will fail. And finally, there are some good resources, particularly from Jan. Jan has also some good blog about using proactive remediation, scripting, and also combining those scripts with toast messages, so that it's not only proactive remediation from a backend perspective, but that also your end users are get notified from a certain for example, you might deviating from a compliance perspective, your BitLocker is not enabled, or you should reboot your system. That kind of examples, that with toast messages you can also generate an interaction with your end users. And I wrote some few blog posts about Endpoint Analytics, so you can find some additional information to there. So, any questions?
No, Ronny, I don't see any. Actually, Pascal is raising his hand. So, Pascal, please unmute yourself and you can ask the question yourself.
Yeah, Ronny, thanks for the presentations. Some good information, so thanks for that. I still got one question. Perhaps you can answer it for me. In regards of the DPO, a lot of information is uploaded to the public cloud.
Yeah.
But what I can see from your presentation, it's all not related to a person. Is that correct? It's all data from the device itself, so we don't have to worry about the fact that we are doing GDPR, of course, and the ruling in that statement.
Yeah.
We have to do something.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and there are if you go and reach out to the Microsoft Docs website, you have also a separated section about privacy and compliance regards to GDPR, PII. And it's true what you mentioned, Pascal. It's they are sending machine-specific information, and they are also making sure that if there was personal data, it's anonymized, so it cannot be tracked to Pascal or to someone else and say, hey, we can identify this person. So. It's from that perspective, it's complete compliant with the regulations. And of course, in the past with Windows Analytics, it's always a discussion depending on what organization you are working for. And within organizations, if they are hearing the word telemetry or data, or their all the red lights are going off. And of course, we should definitely make sure that Microsoft is using the proper data to take benefit of it. Mm-hmm. But for the other end, in general, data is that powerful. The only thing is it should be used in the proper way. And Microsoft is committing that regards to regulation, privacy, and so on. If they are misusing it, that will be they are jeopardizing themselves, so that will never.
No, exactly. But we know that the question may rise. For us, that if we want to implement such solutions, and what you are referring to, if we say we're gonna do some analytics, or we have to push some information into the cloud, then a lot of people are getting scared and saying, okay, what are you going to put in the cloud, and what kind of information is going where? Is it staying in Europe? Is it going to the US? Whatever, and so forth and so on. So therefore.
Exactly. And if your tenant is in Europe, or data is also remaining in Europe. So from that perspective, you're good if your tenant is in Europe.
Yeah.
And regarding your question, I will update the presentation, including a link to the data related stuff, and you can use it if you want to convince and have a conversation based on facts, not based on emotions, but on facts. Then we are good.
Cool. Thanks, man. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Phil, yeah, if there are no questions, I would say please feel free to reach out afterwards via Twitter or other way, and then I will heading it over to Kenneth.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ronny. You have met my expectations. Very interesting presentation. So thanks for that. For the visitors, you might have seen that we actually created a recording. So we will make sure that this meeting is uploaded to our YouTube channel, for which I request you to actually subscribe to it if you have the possibility. Also, the slides will be shared later on, and we will let you know where we have those available in a follow-up email, which we will send out shortly. Also announcing our next WMUG meeting in 2 weeks. To wrap up, again, we would like to thank our sponsors, and I want you already to be aware of the next meeting, not next week, Tuesday, but the week after that, by our Belgian community friends, Tim and Jasper. So please RSVP via our meetup page. Yeah, and with that, I want to wrap up. So for the people in our time zone, enjoy your meal. Thanks for attending our meeting, and we hope to meet you in the next meeting soon. Bye-bye.